Well, good evening, and first of all, our apologies for the good weather. It is terrible to be sitting in a dark room with the good weather. We had organized for rain today, and it would have been much easier to be inside in a room listening to someone speak with rain outside. Sadly, we have some sunshine, so we'll try to do our best. Hopefully it'll rain tomorrow and then be nice again on Saturday for our tour. It's a great privilege and an honor to share with you some of my research. As Bernhard mentioned, this is the beginning of research I did a number of years ago. And also, it's a continuation of research. I'm very indebted to London School of Theology, who this year has given me a sabbatical to do further research on character education and theological education. The blog, which I'll be using, is actually a tool that is part of my research. I'd like my research to be open and participatory, and to also have any of you from this conference or other people join in with the discussions, give me your feedback, give me your input, and hopefully in the end, when a monograph is published on the topic, it will be a collective effort that brings together the wisdom of the practitioners in addition to one person in his office reading books and trying to think. So I'd like to start with a text, a key text that we'll be coming back to, and actually will be the text of our devotions in the morning that will be led by Parush and Peter. And I would just like to read this text. But also, for this very reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue. To virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, to perseverance godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. For if these things are yours and abound, you will be neither barren, as theological educators in theological colleges, nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is the word of the Lord. So, in changing times, it's always important to step back and think of what we're doing in theological education. Take a look at the big picture of the nature, the purpose of what we're doing. We are all under pressures, under the pressures of accreditation, some EAA accreditation, we apologize, competition, finances. I remember when I was academic dean for a year at London School of Theology, I spent more time in Excel than in Word, which was interesting. Innovation, student demands, new models of delivery, all of this coming at it, negotiating faculty that don't always get on the way we'd like to. And in all of this, it's easy to react. It's easy to go into survival mode, rather than to try to respond prophetically and theologically to our educational ventures. Now, you're probably all familiar with the fourfold model of theological education. Those that have studied the theory of theological education have usually broken down the practice of theological education into four main streams of what we actually do. And to use a metaphor that fits our Athenian context, I would like to use the metaphor of four horses pulling a chariot, and the chariot being our theological education, pulled by four horses. The first horse, of course, is academic engagement. It's what we do in academics. In a sense, this could be the head. The second horse is ministerial training. It's the how-to. It's when we train our students to do the work of the ministry, to be pastors, to be evangelists, missionaries, charity workers, whatever. So academic, ministry. And then there's two other horses in what we do. One is spiritual formation. And here, perhaps we could think of the heart, the spiritual formation of our students. And finally, the fourth horse is character education. They're all important. They're all needed to pull the chariot. My hypothesis that I'd like to share with you and discuss with you in these days. And we've put the tables in circles because all of the plenaries there'll be part of presentation, but then a lot of discussion around the table. So this is a joint venture to discuss these things together. My hypothesis is that the one that likely receives least attention and intentional work in our programs of theological education is character education. Just try to mentally tick. Think, okay, how much time, energy, money, meeting space do we dedicate to academics? How much to ministry training? How much to spiritual formation? How much to character education? Spiritual formation and character education are at the least extracurricular. They are outside of the main cart, which is what the word curriculum means. Spiritual formation and character education are difficult to measure, difficult to assess. Students do not receive credit for these activities, and they can be off the radar screens of secular accreditation. And yet, these two horses are at the heart of our ethos as evangelical theological educators. If we just train in academics and in competences and skills, I think we all agree that we've failed. So here we are. And my thesis is that there's two suffering horses pulling the chariot. In 2007, exactly 10 years ago, we met in Rome. How many of you were in Rome? Yes, and we discussed spiritual formation. The topic was spiritual formation. 10 years later, we meet in Athens, and it is character education. In 10 years, maybe Jerusalem? Seth? Yes. All right. So let's start with a little exercise, a little interaction to get to know each other, to start discussing. We all know the story of Jesus writing in the sand, and his writing in the sand actually helped his listeners focus on the things that he was, some important words that he was communicating to them. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, and I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes for this exercise. Start taking a look at this list of virtues. Yeah? So we have a number of virtues put somewhat randomly on this page. Some of you may recognize, for example, down on the lower left-hand corner, those obviously aren't virtues. Those are vices, and they are actually anyone know? The 7 capital vices. Yeah, you'll find the 7 capital virtues scattered throughout as well. You'll find the 4 capital virtues. You find some of the Roman virtues. Actually, the list on the left-hand corner, anybody recognize that? 1 Timothy 3, the virtues of the elders that are qualified to lead a church. Okay, so just take a look at those, and then turn to the person next to you and choose, well, no, I'm going to choose for you, actually. Okay, so these 3 tables on this side, I'd like you to discuss in couples the first question. So you as a leader, which of these virtues, and I'll put them back up there in a minute, which of these virtues have been a key for you to remain effective in your ministry as a leader? What would have happened to you had you not had one of those virtues? So again, look at it, think of yourself, share with the person next to you, for me it was this virtue. This has really been a key in my ministry. The other 3 tables, so 1, 2, and maybe the row in the back, the people that haven't found a table yet, and we'll find one for you for the next session. Think about your graduates. So think about graduates from your college. Think in particular of a graduate from your school who's been a complete disaster in their ministry, in their family, in their church. They've really made a mess of things. Now, those of us without any stones cast the first sin. Should be the other way around, but we've all had these. Okay, now think of that graduate, look at the list, and think again, which virtue was missing? What caused the disaster? Can you link it to a virtue or to a vice? Third group, so these 3 tables here, again, turn to the person next to you, think of your school. Is it possible in your school to graduate as a Christian leader with a theology degree while having the bad character described in the list of those virtues and vices? Is it possible to graduate and have none of those? Okay, so I'll give you 4 or 5 minutes. I'll put the list back up. So here's the list. Turn to the person next to you. You as a leader, you think of your graduates, you think of your school. Go. Okay, it'd be really great to share with each other what has come out at the tables. Feel free, once you get Wi-Fi again, to go down to Character Blog at the end of this, and you can actually leave a reply. You can enter your comments, anything you've thought about this, insights that have emerged. Just write your comment in there, click on post, and it will be there for the world to see and for us to continue our conversation. So let's now come to some definitions. The purpose of this first session is the advent of character. Now, you may have noticed in looking at the program that we've actually given a Christological framework to our conference. And so this first session is on the advent of character. Then tonight we will talk about the passion of character. Tomorrow morning we'll deal with the resurrection of character. And finally, on Saturday, we will go with the parousia, the manifestation of character. So I'm dealing with the advent tonight and then with the passion after our meal. So I think there's no better place to start with a definition, with talking about the advent of character than with trying to agree on a definition. Now, the first thing I'd like to just get out of the way before I actually suggest a definition to you is this question: is everything spiritual? Now, there is one very famous author who you may love or hate, Rob Bell, who actually says, yes, everything is spiritual. And you can see what he has to say, perhaps in a slightly different context. But one might argue that the 4 horses that we've defined previously, academics, ministry training, spiritual formation, and character education, they're all spiritual. Yeah, I mean, academics, we should consider it as spiritual. Yet I would argue that in thinking about theological education, it's actually helpful to make some distinctions, to have more exact definitions that will help us focus on different aspects of our ministry. So what I would like to propose here is that character education is not the same thing as spiritual formation. They are different. When I think of spiritual formation in theological education, what comes to mind is perhaps teaching on spiritual disciplines, the practice of spiritual disciplines, prayer, community, discernment, activities in our schools like formation groups, chapel, prayer, community days, courses on spiritual disciplines, and so forth. And we probably have a quite clear box in our mind and in our programs for spiritual formation. I'm arguing that character education is something else. Character education has to do with the development of virtue. And of course, they overlap. Now, to practice the spiritual discipline of fasting, you need the virtue of self-control. So they're not distinct, there is overlap. But for the purpose of what we're trying to talk about, to think of character education as something distinct from spiritual formation, I think is helpful. So having said that, let's look at a definition. Here's the definition I'd like to start us off with. This comes from an author whose name is James Arthur, and there's Jubilee Centre for Character Education and Virtues Development in the UK. They have a wonderful website, I can give it to you. There's all sorts of resources. They've done a lot of work on character education in education in all contexts. This is the definition they suggest and that I'd like to suggest to you to get our conversation started. So here it is. I'll read it and then I'll unpack it. Character is a set of personal traits or dispositions that produce specific moral emotions, inform motivation, and guide conduct. Character education, now notice the definition is divided in two. The first bit, he's defining character. Now in the second bit, he's defining character education. Character education includes all explicit and implicit educational activities caught, taught, and sought that help individuals develop positive personal strengths called virtues with the aim of promoting human flourishing. So let's just unpack some of the parts of this definition. First of all, character is a set of personal traits and dispositions. Character has to do with who you and I are as a persona. It is personal. If you change character, you have changed the person. Character is deeply tied to personal identity. And as the definition says, it delineates our personal traits and dispositions. The words are interesting. Yeah? Traits makes me think of a poor trait. A poor trait is what I look like. And a disposition has to do with my position. My position with regards to God, neighbor, and experiences of life. So character has to do with my traits, who I am, and my disposition. It is helpful at this point to make sure we don't confuse character with personality. They're often used as synonyms for the work we're doing. They're different. Personality, Myers-Briggs, all of that wonderful stuff, that has to do with who we are as persons, and introvert, extrovert, and all the rest of that. Character has to do with virtue. And while personality is not morally committed, there's nothing more or less moral about being an introvert or an extrovert, character is morally loaded. So, character is a set of personal traits and dispositions. Second bit of the definition says that character produces specific moral emotions, informs motivation, and guides conduct. So what we see here is that character actually, it has specific outcomes. It is a deep internal state of being that conditions all that we do in thought, word, and deed. It's not just external conformity and action. It's not just do this and be good. It's deeper than that. The specific outcomes are emotional, moral emotions, motivational, informs motivation, and they are action, that they have to do with action. Now, let me make an example. Think of your children, if you have children, and think of their bedrooms. Okay, what virtue is usually missing in the bedrooms of our children? What's the virtue that's missing?
Orderliness.
Thank you very much. Orderliness, right out of my notes. Okay, order is a virtue. It's one of the virtues. Orderliness is a virtue. So how do we know that our children aren't simply obeying and going to make their beds because or else they're not going to have supper? How do we know that the virtue of orderliness has actually been developed in their lives through our work as parents? Well, the definition would say that if orderliness is part of your character, you are emotionally bothered by disorder. Yeah? Now, you can also be OCD. That's another thing. Obsessive, compulsive. But normally, a person who is orderly, when there is disorder, you are emotionally bothered. And when there is order, you are emotionally at peace. You feel that is the way things should be. So there's an emotional component to your character. Second, you will want to have order in your life and in the life of people. There's a desire, there's a motivation to want to see order in your life and in those around you. Thirdly, you will consistently act to produce order. And these three components, so the emotions, the desire, and the actions, according to this definition, work together to talk about character. And we'll unpack some of these maybe later on during other sessions, other examples. Third, so now we move to the second bit of the definition, which is character education. Now, first of all, just dream for a moment with me about your theological colleges being able to produce character in the lives of your graduates. That they will come out after 2, 3, 4 years, however many years they are with you. By the way, we've got people in streaming. Hello, everybody in streaming. and the audio was on. Someone was clanging dishes as they're washing the dishes as they're watching us, whoever. What was I talking about? They were making order. Yes, thank you. They went right to action. They were okay, so imagine in your college that this can actually be done. You can actually, in somehow, contribute to character in the lives of your student. Is it possible? Character education says yes. There are things that we can actually do to make this happen. Graduates that will be emotionally, motivationally, and behaviorally tuned to the list of virtues that we've just seen. So, what can be done? The definition says character education includes all explicit and implicit activities, educational activities. And here the words, and we'll come back to these often, the words caught and taught are particularly important. The word caught, character education can be caught in the school community. So the community of staff, students provide the example, provide the culture, provide the inspirational influence in a positive ethos that motivates and promotes character development. We'll come back to this in a moment. But secondly, the definition says character can also be taught. The school provides educational experiences in and outside of the classroom that equip students with the language, the knowledge, the understanding, the skills, and the attributes that enable character development. So it can be caught, it can be taught, and we'll unpack both of these hopefully in the next days. So therefore, if it can be caught and taught, it should be sought by the school, and hopefully that's why we're all here. And finally, fourth bit of the definition, so it includes explicit educational activities that help individuals develop positive personal strengths called virtues. And here we come to the core. We come to the core of character education, which is actually virtues. And we'll come back to this in just a moment, so hold it. Concluding the definition, virtues with the aim of promoting human flourishing. Private and public virtue come together. And the more people exhibit good character, as Bernhard reminded us in the introductory comments, the more people exhibit virtues, the healthier our society will be. Not just the church, the society. This may indeed be one of the contributions of theological education to society. As we are positioned strategically to form the much needed leaders, influencers, and responsible followers that are women and men of character. So character to promote human flourishing. Okay, so here's a starting definition, so you know where I'm coming from. There may be other definitions. You may disagree. If you disagree, that's great. This is a blog post. At the bottom, there's a comment box. Write your definition. It's probably better than mine. Let's move, though, into virtue. So as I've said, virtue as the heart, and we're kind of coming to the heart of the Advent part of it here. When you received the flyer for the General Assembly, you received a PDF for the invitation, and the top part of the flyer was a bunch of artwork. And maybe some of you wondered, what is this artwork doing on a flyer? It was all secular. I guess Raphael's probably sacred, depending what you think on Caravaggio. But what I would like to do, I would like to use the 4 pictures that were on the cover of the flyer to talk about virtue. And this is a definition I'll be working. Virtues are settled, stable, and consistent qualities of character concerned with morally praiseworthy conduct in specific, significant, and distinguishable spheres of human life. You can forget that. It's on the blog. You can come back to it. But I did need to read that. So let's start with this first picture. Any one of the Greeks in the room? No? Okay, this is a statue of Arete. Did I pronounce that right, Mirta? Arete?
Erasmus or not?
No? Arete. Arete. Okay. This is a statue of Arete. It's found in the library of Celsus in Ephesus. This representation, Arete, represents the heart of the educational project of ancient Greece. Arete is, in fact, virtue. It is, and we'll come back to it in a moment, it is the capacity to do the best in the best way of one's activity. Arete is excellence in human behavior. It is to be fully human in the best sense of the word. It is for Socrates and Plato the good moral behavior of man that follows the good in every action. Arete was different from techne. Techne was the technical skills. It was the know-how. It was knowing how to do things, which in a sense, much higher education today is techne. It's about skills and competences. The Greeks, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, ranked educational input, and techne was lower than arete. Arete, to be a virtuous person, that was what education was really about. This word inspires some of you. Any of you ethics teachers? No one teaches ethics? Oh, good, a couple. Oh, oops, better be careful. It inspires the Aretaic turn in contemporary moral philosophy to emphasize character, human excellence, or virtue. Writers like Anscombe, Foote, Stone, Zagrebesky. Surely virtue ethics and MacIntyre are inspired by the concepts of arete that come from Greek philosophy. Second image on the flyer was this. This is Sebastiano Ricci, and the painting is Hercules at the crossroads. So again, we're in ancient Greek mythology. And Hercules, after killing his music tutor Linus with a lyre, he flees to the mountains where he's tending his cattle. And there, according to the allegorical parable, the choice of Heracles, which is painted here by Ricci, he was visited by vice and virtue, the two women in the painting. Vice offers him a choice of pleasant and easy life. Virtue offers him the choice of a severe but glorious life. And Hercules chose the latter. He chose virtue. He chose the difficult but glorious life. And Hercules has become the hero, the cultural inspiration for Greeks and Romans alike. And the roots of much European history and culture are found there. The third image is a painting by Raphael. So now we're safely back in Italy. And this painting by Raphael is the three theological virtues. The three theological virtues being, help me? Yes, faith, hope, and charity. And in the painting, I've just highlighted the middle. I've highlighted charity, and then I believe faith is above it, and no, faith is below it, and hope is above it. But the way that Raphael has decided to depict the virtue of love is fascinating. Charity is in the middle as a fertile woman who's laden with children. She's loving and she's serving life, not just those that are lost. Charity is not just about serving the lost and those that are downtrodden. It is also about serving those that are living, that are flourishing, therefore children, therefore marriage, therefore education. The cherub on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, bears fire to remind us that love is not cold and detached, but a moving passion that brings warmth. It is not being devoid of passion, but being moved by good passion. That's the virtue of love. On the right, there's the other cherub who's pouring out abundant grapes, a cornucopia of abundance, symbol of giving oneself generously. Below is a similar representation of faith, actually found in the incarnation and in the living presence of Christ. And hope, in the three images above, is found in prayer that wins the temptation and rests in providence. And I won't unpack those. But again, just three beautiful images for the three theological virtues. The final painting to inspire us to think about art is a painting by, anyone recognize this? Yes, it's a Caravaggio painting. This is one of the three paintings that Caravaggio painted of the scene of David and Goliath. This was actually painted in the last year of Caravaggio's life. He'd fled Rome because he'd killed Tommasoni, and he fled for his life. The Pope was, there was a capital punishment on his head. He fled to Naples, then he went to Malta, and then he came back to Italy, and he was a tormented man, and he really wanted the pardon of the Pope. And it wasn't just because he feared for his life. There was genuine repentance, we believe, in the life of Caravaggio. He painted 3 paintings to try to get himself forgiven by the Pope. This is one of them. And this painting was on a ship on the way to Rome. The ship was shipwrecked, and Caravaggio was laid out on a beach, and where he actually died on this beach just north of Rome. And the paintings went on the road to Rome. He never received pardon. The head of Goliath that is cut off is a self-portrait. That is Caravaggio. He's painted himself in the head of Goliath that has been chopped off. And there's a very important small detail that escapes vision, also because these paintings are often exposed and it's far away and you can't get close and sometimes it's dark. On the hilt of the sword in David's hand, there are 4 letters. H-A-S-O-S, which are an acronym for the Augustinian motto, Humilitas occidit superbiam, which translated means humility kills pride. And so here's Caravaggio, a very proud man, who in his pride, in his wrath, took the life of another man. And now he's coming back, penitent, feeling like Goliath with the head chopped off. And he says, humility has killed my pride, and I come seeking pardon. I come seeking virtue. I just get shivers. To me, this is the essence of theological education. Humility killing pride, and virtue replacing vice. By the way, can you imagine actually teaching some lessons on this to inspire your students, using art to inspire to character education and virtue? So this is art to help us think about virtue. And my final point, and then I'll give you some work and some discussion to do, hopefully started some thinking, some stimulating your thoughts to have fruitful conversations around the table. My final point has to do with where we actually are. We are in Athens. So we've used art to focus on the virtues. Now we're going to use geography. This session deals with the advent of character. We're looking at the traditions, at the roots of character education. And what better place in the world to have a conference on character education than Athens? I can think of no better place. Here, and again, let me use a few images just to walk with me through my talk. Here in Athens, virtue was caught. If you study Plato's Republic, probably the masterpiece of Western philosophy, many have said all philosophy after Plato's Republic is nothing but a postscript. Plato's vision in the Republic was of a city, Athens, that would be the city itself, the nurturing ground where paideia could work. I'll come to paideia in a minute. But what Plato saw was that Athens, the ideal state, would be the air that was breathed to nourish the young Athenians into the ideal education, which would then in turn become arete, and which in turn would become human flourishing. So it was not just teaching virtue, it was the virtue caught in the city of Athens. Hence, for example, Plato favored censorship in Athens of certain kinds of plays that he thought would not contribute to a culture of virtue. So there was censorship to create that sort of atmosphere where flourishing into virtue could happen in Athens. So here virtue was caught. Here virtue was also taught in Athens. And it was called paideia. Paideia, the word simply meaning culture, that comes from the Latin word colere, which means to grow. Something grows into a cultivation. And the notion of paideia was that human beings are seeds that need to be nurtured to become what they're meant to be. And what they're meant to be is virtuous women and men. So here in Athens, virtue knowledge was given. The curriculum of paideia, if you read in the Republic, is fascinating. You think, oh, Plato, wow, to study under Plato as a young man, I wonder what it was. What it was? Really, as a young person in Athens, you would study three things. There's three elements in the curriculum of paideia from which they started. The first was gymnastics, the second was music, and the third was literature. All three were meant to cultivate virtue. Gymnastics, discipline. Music, to develop the virtues of beauty and harmony. Literature, to inspire through the stories of the heroes to want to be virtuous and to escape vice. That was the curriculum of paideia. And then, of course, as they grew, reason would kick in. But initially, that was what was taught. And of course, here virtue reasoning was provided. If you look at the writings of the great Greek philosophers, the Stoics, the Epicureans, and of course Aristotle, they contributed philosophical frameworks for eudaimonia, for the good life, for human flourishing, both individual and collective in the polis. So Athens was the place where much of our Western culture looks to for this educational product. And in fact, from Athens, virtue was not only caught and taught, but from Athens, virtue spread. So here we have an image of the New Testament. Virtue language from Athens spread into European culture. In Greece, then Rome, then through Aristotle into medieval theology, and indeed into much of European history and culture. And here's just a few examples of this. We read the text from 2 Peter 1. There are similar texts to that in the New Testament that are typically called ethical lists. Can anyone think of other ethical lists in the New Testament? Galatians 5. Other ethical lists in the New Testament? James 1. Titus, the qualities of an elder. 1 Timothy, listen to these. 1 Timothy, above reproach, faithful to wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. That's probably the only one with the skill. Not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not lover of money, managing the own family well, and so forth. Now, I'm treading on thin ice here because there's probably very good New Testament scholars in the room. But there are some who would see in these ethical lists in the New Testament parallels with similar ethical lists in the culture of the Greeks and the Romans. Influences and parallels with Socratic and Stoic philosophical writings that had very, very similar lists that intended to instill praise or shame in the hearer, and all aimed at producing character. A second example of virtue spreading from Greece is, of course, Rome. The Via Romana, the qualities which gave Rome, the Roman Empire, its moral strength to conquer the world. The image here is Marcus Aurelius, who learned from the Stoics the virtues of duty, courage, determination, self-control, clemency. And there are lists of virtue. You can simply Google them, go onto Wikipedia, look at the Via Romana, and look at the list of virtues that are there that the Romans said, this is what has made the Roman Empire great. And when the Roman Empire declined and it fell, it because those virtues were lacking in the leaders and in the emperors. So virtues like autoritas, comitas, interestingly, comitas is actually the virtue of humor. The Romans felt that humor was a virtue that was essential for the well-being of the polis. Clemencia, dignitas, firmitas, frugalitas, and on it goes. Moving on from the Greek, from the Roman Empire, from the New Testament, into the Middle Ages, we find masterpieces of literature such as Dante's Divine Comedy. And again, any of you who've studied some of Dante's Divine Comedy know that the entire structure of this work is based on virtue and vice. He has hell, he has purgatory, he has heaven. All three are structured around the capital vices and the capital virtues. So the 7 virtues that lead you to ever higher levels of heaven are chastity, temperance, generosity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility. The 7 vices, and here's an image of Dante's hell, and again, you can Google images of that. I can probably zoom in a little bit. So in circle 2, oops, that went wrong. Trust me. Okay, we're going to have to back up Judy just a minute. That's the next one. The 7 vices, pride, greed, envy, gluttony, wrath, and acedia. When was the last time you had a chapel talk on the 7 capital vices or on the 7 capital virtues? Or that you use these words in a personal tutorial with a student? Of the 7 capital vices, do you know which one was the one that most tormented theology students in the Middle Ages, studying theology in monasteries and whatnot? The one that tormented them the most, we would think, lust, because they were all single friars. No. The one that tormented them the most was acedia. And acedia is the lack of passion. What Baudelaire today would call l'ennui, boredom, lack of passion. Oh, so boring. And here we are with our students in our theological schools that are bored, and sometimes their body language in class, you know. And it's almost like they're challenging us as lecturers. Come on, I dare you, stimulate me if you can. You know, make me interested. And we do everything. You know, we learn Prezi. We get the animations right in our PowerPoints. We do all sorts of things to try to entertain and get the attention of our students. Why don't we just call it what it is? It's sin. It's vice. It's acedia. And it needs character work, not more entertainment. Spiritual traditions like the Benedictine tradition. This is an image of Cassian's tree of virtue, and he also produced a tree of vice. And again, you can just Google, find the images. Cassian's tree of virtue, tree of vice. Here he has, interestingly, virtue. The roots of virtue are in humility. And then the trunk comes up, and the 3 main branches are faith, hope, and charity. And then they break down into other branches and I won't read them all to you, but you can see how he's developing and how the Benedictine spiritual tradition is based on character and on virtue. And of course, theological education. So these are examples of why Athens is so significant. That was my main point. I may have forgotten in the meantime. But we started from geography. Why is Athens important? Because from here, character education and the thinking on virtues spread. It spread throughout the empire, spread throughout Europe. And us as Europeans and maybe those coming from the Middle East will have other traditions as well that are feeding into this, but we're speaking particularly as those in Europe are deeply indebted historically, culturally, philosophically to what happened here in Athens. Athens and theological education, higher education, in particular theological education, were deeply influenced and were actually seen as the vehicle to develop a flourishing society, a kingdom of virtue. The Athens model, if you've not read Between Athens and Berlin, you really should. Kelsey, in this book, he summarizes the Athens model as culturing the soul, schooling as character formation. Farley, in Theologia, which is the book that pretty much started off a lot of contemporary discussion on theological education, again, really a must-read, indicates that the purpose of his work on theological education was to promote a Christian paideia. In the tradition of Clement of Rome, Origen, and most of the ancient traditions who claimed that Christianity is paideia. As this was true, if this was true, theological education had only one main goal: the knowledge of God and the conforming of souls to be holy and virtuous. That was the purpose of theological education. Now, I will stop and I will allow you to pursue the next sort of the final chapter of this session in small groups. So I've not developed this, and I'd like you to develop it in your groups. And again, I'd be really thankful if then you can log in and in the comment box here share some of what, if you actually do get a Wi-Fi signal, you could actually do it as you're talking. But here's the project for the next, how much have I got still, Bernard? We've got about 20 minutes yet? Yeah. We've got about 20 minutes. Good, I'm on time. So what I would like you to do, I would like you as tables, so now you speak as a table, to investigate the theological roots of character education. I've done some of the cultural, some of the tradition, give you some definitions, but it's really important as theological educators that we theologize on our educational thinking. So here we're thinking of character education. We need to think about this theologically. So what I would like to challenge you to do in your groups is to think theologically, what are the roots of character education theologically? What might they be? How could we ground a project of character education and justify it theologically? If it helps, I would suggest the following lines of discussion. How many biblical scholars do we have in the room? Biblical studies is your main thing. Okay. How many theologians? One. Oh, I got two. Okay. I mean, you're systematic theologians. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. Okay. And how many practical theologians? How many are neither of those three? Oh. Well, okay. But you would consider yourself theologians. Yes, but of a different sort. Okay, so I just kind of picked the main sort of disciplines that we're specialists in. I would suggest around the tables, identify yourself first of all as you discuss it. I'm a biblical scholar, I'm a systematician, I'm a historian, I'm a practical theologian, whatever. Just say that so it's up in the front and no one is offended. The biblical scholars contribute to the discussion around the table with perhaps this line of thinking. Approach what you see around the issue of character education in the Bible and what a biblical theology of character education might look like. Theologians, how character education might be grounded in theological fields. For example, theological anthropology, perhaps, or creation theology, perhaps. Okay, I won't say more, I'll leave it for you to think it through. Practical theologians, how do you see the links of character education to applied theology? So for example, homiletics, any links at all that you could be making between practical theology and character education. Okay, so we'll have 20 minutes, after which I'll call you together, I'll read one final statement, and then I'll turn it back over to Bernhard to conclude this first session. Okay, everything clear? Very good. I'll join one of your tables and have a good discussion. Okay, if we can draw it to a close. Again, it would be great to gather the collective wisdom of the last 20 minutes of theological discussion around character education so we can all share it. And I would invite you again to visit the blog, go to that particular post on theological roots, write in just even a couple of sentences of something that you thought was really meaningful, probably something you said. I'd like to conclude just reading a paragraph. As EEAA, we've applied to Templeton Foundation, which some of you may know is a rather significant philanthropical funding enterprise, for a project on character education. Now, we have no idea if it will fly. We won't know till a year. Probably not. But it was a very good exercise to put together an application to an agency like that for projects that have to do with character education and theological education. And I'd just like to read to you what one of the paragraphs I wrote to Templeton Foundation to try to justify why they should invest money in us in the EAA in this direction. The context of theological education is a very fertile environment to develop discourse and practice around virtues such as love, joy, forgiveness, and generosity. For these are typically seen as Christian virtues that enjoy a robust theological grounding. Likewise, the character traits, and by the way, Templeton Foundation, one of the main areas they actually do fund is character and virtue development in the world. Yeah, so it's a foundation worth about, I think they have over $3 billion to give away over time. So we haven't asked for all of them, but. So here we are as theological educators saying, we're here. Likewise, the character traits of humility, honesty, diligence, entrepreneurship, and thrift are also traditionally associated with Christian models of leadership. And most theological colleges would already claim to want to form leaders of this kind in the service of church and society. Furthermore, there are some intellectual virtues that find very favorable environment in an academic culture, such as constructive thinking, communication, curiosity, and awe. And again, the context of theological education provides an ideal culture to cultivate these virtues. Future-mindedness, which is one of the key ones Templeton Foundation is looking for, finds a welcoming audience in theological education, where many colleges already refer to transformation and cultural contextualization in their mission statements, in a growing awareness that past traditions are insufficient to serve a rapidly changing society. Indeed, together with the classical heritage, it can be argued that the Christian theological tradition in the Western world has provided much of the bedrock around virtue and character. And character education may well represent a crucial intersection in the dialogue between faith and culture. The tradition and culture to support character education and theological education are therefore mostly in place. And what is needed is a more concerted work in translating this into practice and intentional educational outcomes. It is hard to think of other environments in the world that are more naturally favorable to the cultivation of virtues than a theological school. And our renewed attention as theological educators to character education may well set off the picking of some low-hanging fruit. Thank you.